The UFC is finally here, guys. The Ultimate Fraud Championship between Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett. It goes down this Saturday. These men may just be the least deserving contenders the UFC has ever gotten together and put a belt on the line for it, because the Green Goblin Josh Emmett is going to be fighting Little Lord Fauntleroy, the world's biggest spoiled brat, Yair Rodriguez. These guys are the epitome of handed to, not earned. And I'm looking forward to the fight. It just kind of boggles my mind as to why the UFC made this an interim title fight. Listen, I'm not the biggest fan of interim belts to begin with. I think the UFC throws them out there a little bit too often. But this might be the worst decision ever, because neither of these men are big names. I could understand if this is a surging, massive name at 145 pounds, like a Khamzat Chimaev type at the featherweight division, and you're going to give him an interim title because you want Volkanovski, who's probably going to lose to Islam, to then turn it around 5 months later to take on the interim champion with a massive name. Yair Rodriguez, I understand that a lot of Mexicans get behind their fighters, and the UFC does want a Mexican champion because they don't really have many. Brandon Moreno's one, but they want to grow the sport in that side of the world. They want to take over boxing, right? But Yair doesn't have like that many fans riding behind him. He has a really entertaining style, but I've never gone to Yair Rodriguez's page and seen him just getting shitloads of support. The guy is under the radar. If you've ever seen an interview of him, he's this spoiled, smug brat. He was demanding a title shot after beating Brian Ortega in whatever the fuck you're going to even call that kind of win. I understand people are giving him credit these days for finding the submission over Ortega, and he was beating Ortega's ass and looking really good on the feet, and we'll get to that later. But still, just as much of that is Brian Ortega's shoulder giving out, and it was a little bit fluky. Let's be real, okay? I know we want to get hardcore out here. We want to say, well, actually, he submitted, but let's be real, guys. It was a little bit fluky. And before that, he lost to Max Holloway. So Yair Rodriguez, the guy was calling for a fucking title shot, bro, and saying, I'm not going to do shit until I fight Alexander Volkanovski. He was even saying an interim belt wasn't good enough for him. And the UFC rewarded that behavior after setting a precedent for years that, listen, you think you're going to set out for a title shot? Screw you. To the back of the line you go. We'll just get the next guy because we don't revolve around you. But they're giving this guy an interim belt. They want to put a little belt around his waist. And I get it. The interim belt isn't the real freaking belt. But it does mean something. It has a very bold image. If you're wearing a belt around your waist, that says a lot. That means that the UFC wants you to be an ambassador for the sport, like someone who's held in a high regard, as someone who's prestigious. Yair hasn't earned it. He's not earned it. He's had a good career. He has, and he's only really lost to the best, like a Frankie Edgar, who was still really good at the time, and Max Holloway, who he gave a really tough fight. He's not a big name. The guy doesn't even have a streak going. He's on a one-fight win. Like, not a streak. He lost to Holloway. And then you're looking at Josh Emmett, dude. First of all, he didn't beat Dan Ige, and then he fought Calvin Kattar, and he lost that one too. But for some reason, the judges gave him both of these fights. And I do not know any fans that scored those fights in the favor of Josh Emmett. And also, I just want to mention this. The guy goes to the hospital. He looks like he's on death's door every single time he steps out of the cage. Like, this guy has 5-10 injuries every time he fights. Look at Josh Emmett, bro. I believe that he tore his ACL in his war with Shane Burgos, but he also had a fractured orbital bone. After Calvin Kattar, he had to eat through a feeding tube. Like, this guy's body just can't hold up. He's 37 years old, and he actually lost his last 2 fights, and this is who might have a belt around their waist? Come on. I would have understood if they were to have put Arnold Allen and a Yair Rodriguez in there together. I just think that neither of these men have done enough, and I think I would have been happier if it were a number 1 contenders fight. At least, sure, I still don't think they deserve that, but at least you're not going to put a belt around their waist. I just hate that image. Could you guys imagine spoiled Yair rocking a belt around his waist, calling himself the fucking champion? That'd be so cringeworthy, man. And Josh Emmett, that'd be the definition of a fucking Mickey Mouse belt. I don't mind the fight in and of itself. It should be a really fun fight. Josh Emmett always brings a good fight, and Yair Rodriguez has one of the most entertaining styles in the game. I'll give him that. I think he's a top 10 striker in the UFC right now, to be honest. Maybe that would be pushing it a little bit, but you couldn't have this guy outside of like your top 12. He is extremely skilled. His hands have improved a lot throughout the years, and that's another reason as to why I'm going to pick him to beat the Green Goblin in this one. Now, the Green Goblin's got big power. He doesn't really go to his wrestling that much. He has a background in wrestling. He wrestled in college. He's used it here and there, but I just think that he gasses when he uses it as well. That's why he chooses not to. He likes to stand and bang, but his body is very fragile. As I said, he's 37 years old. You look at all the injuries that this guy gets throughout his fights. He's in the hospital eating out of feeding tubes every time he fights. I'm going to read off the list of injuries he got after he fought, and I believe this was the Shane Burgos fight, this was the Shane Burgos fight. Number 1, complete ACL tear. Number 2, MCL sprain with partial tearing. 3, Baker's cyst rupture. This guy has a cyst rupture, bro. Number 4, focal impact fracture of the femur on the lateral. And number 5, chondral defect, cartilage on tibia, literally matching. I don't know what the fuck that means, but listen, this guy is just the most injury-prone fighter in the UFC. Again, feeding tubes. His eye is falling out. Like, his face is fucking pitch black after he fights. Swelling, purple, you name it. The Green Goblin has it all. And if I'm actually looking at where Josh Emmett stands in the 145-pound weight class, and I'm just looking at his skill set, guys, he is not even a top 8 fucking featherweight, and he's fighting for an interim belt right now. He lost to Dan Ige. All right? Dan Ige will never crack a top 5 for the rest of his goddamn life. He just won't. He is okay. He's got some good basic skills. He's got some power. He's not ever going to crack the top 5. Ever. All right? And then you look at a guy like Calvin Kattar, who is, to me, right outside of the top 5 best featherweights right now. Calvin Kattar is good. He deserves this fight more than a fucking Josh Emmett, dude. If I'm looking at the featherweights, as I said, Max Holloway's better than him. Alexander Volkanovski's better than him. I'd pick Brian Ortega to beat him. I'd pick Giga Chikadze to beat him. I really would. I think Giga beats him up. Giga actually showed that he has some really good cardio. Ilya Topuria, I think, beats him. Evloev beats him. Hell, Bryce Mitchell might beat him. So where does that put him? That puts him right around the 10 spot. This is a number 10 ranked UFC featherweight fighting for an interim belt. Just to show you guys how bad this actually looks. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. He has a little bit of a win streak, but he lost his last 2 fights, and I can't look past them. Sure, they were close. But having a close fight with Dan Ige and having a relatively close fight with Calvin Kattar doesn't impress me that much. Calvin Kattar had a somewhat close fight against Dan Ige. Imagine Dan Ige fighting for a featherweight interim belt. It's just, you're out of your mind. This guy doesn't beat Evloev. He doesn't even beat Giga Chikadze. He loses to Ortega. He loses to Topuria. Might even lose to Bryce Mitchell. And I think that Yair, in his prime, 30 years old, one of the best strikers in the UFC. His hands have improved a lot, and he showed that against Max Holloway. He showed that against Brian Ortega. He was piecing up Ortega on the feet, landing really big punching combinations on Ortega. His speed is incredible. His kicking game, his calf kicks. I mean, this is a guy that's tore his ACL a few times in the Green Goblin. You know what I mean? And Yair Rodriguez has some of the nastiest leg kicks in the UFC. I think that Josh Emmett's body is going to give out if this goes the distance. If it goes into the 3rd and 4th round, I think it's just a matter of time before he gets completely destroyed and gassed. Yair Rodriguez is also a volume striker. The guy throws in high volume. He has really good cardio as well. I mean, to go 5 rounds with Max Holloway and arguably take the 5th round says a lot about him. I mean, I think if you were to throw Yair in there with Dan Ige, I think he completely schools him for 3 rounds, destroys him, maybe even TKOs him. I was really impressed with his fight with Max Holloway. He pushed him, was making Max shoot for takedowns, and I understand. You got to give credit to Max in shooting those takedowns. That's something that a smart MMA fighter would do if they are, having hairy moments on the feet. But Yair's the only guy, aside from Alexander Volkanovski, to drag Max Holloway into a back and forth war. I get Dustin Poirier did it, but that was at lightweight, so I understand. I think that Yair is going to knock him out in the 2nd round. That's my pick. That's my pick for this fight. I think he's going to hurt him to the legs. He's going to significantly slow down his movement. I think that in the second round, we will see a completely different Josh Emmett from the one that's going out in the first round. I think the body shots are going to wear on him. Yair Rodriguez has some of the most nasty kicks to the body in the UFC. We saw what he did to Jeremy Stevens, almost TKO'd him with a good body shot. And I think he's going to land a nice head kick. The volume is going to be too much. He mixes it up. He's a very versatile striker, extremely fast. I don't see him getting caught by like a big overhand right. He has a really good chin, so even if he does get caught, I think he'll be able to take it well. And you're putting him up against a guy that's body's falling apart in every single one of his fights, that's eating out of a feeding tube after fighting a guy like Calvin Kattar, where it wasn't even that great of a war. I think Yair is going to chin him, and I think he's going to chin him badly. I think he's going to knock him out in the second round with like a really quick switch kick to the body, and then he might land some follow-up shots up against the fence with the hands, or I think he's just going to catch him with a head kick. Maybe a front kick, maybe a jumping head kick, like a question mark kick. Dude, he's going to catch him with something, and I think he's going to wobble him badly and just put him out. The 37-year-old man, he's going to put him out, Yair Rodriguez. And he'll be fighting Volkanovski next, which is okay. It's actually an interesting matchup because I think that Yair gives anyone on the feet a tough fight. But yeah, he'll probably lose to Volkanovski. Volk can mix it up. He can grapple. He can wrestle. He can hold him up against the fence. And I think that Yair would gas out a little bit. I think Volkanovski's physicality, I think that would really wear on Yair Rodriguez. And I think that he's just the smarter fighter, more experienced fighter. And he'd probably be coming back with a vengeance after taking a loss. But who do you guys think is going to win this fight? I'm rocking with Yair, although I can't stand the guy. I'm not a big fan of him. I am excited for this fight. I think it'll be more entertaining than the main event. To me, the main event just might be a big buzzkill because the card in and of itself isn't all that great. But at least Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett have the potential to be a bit of a scrap. And I know that it'll be fun while it lasts. Do I see it going to decision? Probably not. I don't. I just think that Josh Emmett's body in a 5-rounder at the age of 37, when this guy's eating out of feeding tubes, I don't think it's going to look so good for him in the later rounds. And I sure as fuck don't see him shooting for takedowns. And if he does, I think he's going to gas Yair Rodriguez, TKO. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time. By the way, if you're an aspiring MMA fighter, never neglect your nutrition. That is something that is overlooked by plenty of younger athletes. Diet is a massive factor in that. You are what you eat, and your abilities are only as good as your sources of food. That's why I have a fitness cookbook with comfort foods made with whole and unprocessed foods, things that will not give you any inflammation, foods that'll boost your testosterone and give you the best sort of recovery. Guys, check out my Real Food Cookbook. Especially if you're competing in a sport that requires you to cut weight, you need a diet that's going to sustain your energy throughout the process. The Real Food Cookbook has plenty of recipes that are delicious, that will allow you to eat heartily and not gain fat.